the Countryside Podcasts with Chris Skinner.
Could be up to a 15-minute wait.
Okay. High Ash Farm. Once again, the week's come round, and it's a great pleasure for me to visit Farmer Chris Skinner on his square mile of South Norfolk, enjoying the wildlife on the farm. And we're in the mobile bird hide, aren't we, which is otherwise known as the farm pickup.
Yes, the height of luxury. And Rat is on my lap, my terrible terrier. And what we've done, it's a bit of a gamble, this one, because what I hope to see may be there, may not be there. We're in some dense woodland. We're right at the southern end of Fox's Grove, 30-acre chunk of woodland, and we have something special here. We have all three native species of British woodpecker. The largest is the green woodpecker. The middle-sized one, which is the commonest, is the great spotted woodpecker. And then a diminutive little sparrow-sized woodpecker is the lesser spot woodpecker. So in front of us, we've got some tall trees. Some of them are quite large, 18, 24 inches through the trunk and going up like telegraph poles. And the smaller trees have had to copy them in order to get the sunlight. So there's some only 8, 9, 10 inches in diameter. You can almost get your hands around them. And they've gone up for the light, but they're also 60, 70 feet tall. So basically we're looking at telegraph poles with leaves on the top of them. And there's one of the little trees, it's a sycamore. Oh, I just saw some movement near a nest hole, which is what we're looking at. Oh, it's a squirrel. It's a grey squirrel. It's just gone past. That's not good news. Right, so the tree that we're looking at is about 80 feet tall, and it's very slim indeed, and at about 45 feet up, so it's impossible for us to get up there, is a hole, and it's freshly excavated.
Looks like quite a large one to me.
It's about 50 millimetres across the diameter. That's 2 inches in old money. And it's the work of the great spotted woodpecker. Look at that! Yes, it's the female. No black, no red spot on the back of her head, but she's got red under her. And there's another one. Is that another woodpecker? Yes. I think we've got male and female, and they're just feeding the young. Oh, and there's a squirrel right next to them as well. And she's gone off without giving the... Oh, he's coming now. There should be a little red spot, and
I can see the chick in there.
Yes, look,
poking his head out
of the nest hole.
Oh, there still.
Yes, yeah. And it's,
both parents fed.
Both parents fed them very, very quick. You have to be quick so as to not to give the location of the nest away. So we're looking at Dendrocoppus major. I love the scientific names. It makes it seem quite posh. And another one's come. Females come back. And the youngster, or one of the youngsters, because there's only room for one to get its head out at a time.
It seems quite a bold way of doing it for the youngster to poke the head out straight away like that.
Right, I'm just going to pop my binoculars up because it's up there so high.
There it is. Wow.
Yes, it stuck its head out. I've got it.
And all of this is done in real time, by the way.
Yes, we've only
parked up, started talking,
there
and within a minute or so...
I'll pass you the binoculars, and the youngster keeps popping his head out, and you'll see there's some red on the front of the head, which disappears over the next few weeks, and that's true of all the young... Oh, yes, there's the head sticking out the hole.
Oh, yes.
Normally, they'll call at this point in time, just calling mum and dad back with a continuous sort of chirrup noise. We are really lucky to see it. I thought we were going to have to sit here some while because the feeding sessions are about 15 minutes apart. It seems like forever when your neck is cranked up, almost looking up vertically. We're parked about 25 feet away from the base of the trunk, and so we're looking up at quite a steep angle.
The chick is large.
Yeah, they are large, and when they first hatch, there's up to 4 eggs, occasionally 5 eggs, perfectly spherical eggs, white and round, and they'll be about 14 to 15 inches, about 400 millimetres down the trunk in quite an excavated nest chamber. So obviously that tree is very, very unstable when you consider there's a hole in it, but then there's a nest chamber about a foot beneath the hole. And that's the beauty of sort of decaying and trees of all different ages, and even dead trees are used as well. So, another adult come. That's the male with a little red spot on the back of his head. Oh, beautiful.
Clinging to the side of the tree.
Yes, and that's another speciality of woodpeckers, which very few other birds have. The toes are arranged for gripping on quite smooth bark, 2 toes facing forwards, whereas many birds have 3 toes facing forwards, and what's happened is one of the toes has migrated round and facing backwards. So on woodpeckers, those 3 species I mentioned, you have 2 toes facing forwards, 2 toes facing backwards. It's got another one of those strange scientific names. It's called zygodactyl, spelt with a Z. So in this area of woodland, we've got all 3 species of woodpecker. Again this year, we had them last year. There's 2 green woodpecker nests at the far end of the wood.
Oh, there we are.
Another adult's come. Now, what I think's happening, it's not normal. Oh, it's gone in. You can see under the tail cover, as that adult disappeared in, it was bright blood red, and it's out again. And it's probably taken some poo out. They bring food and take the poo out in a little sort of fetal sack, we call it, and so the nest stays fairly clean. Now, what we were seeing was 1 youngster in there, but I want you to imagine 2 or 3 or even 4 youngsters in there, and the parents, I think, have fed up with feeding them and wanting them to come out. So that's what I think they're doing.
Because they look ready almost,
I
don't
was really apprehensive that we'd sit here like a couple of village idiots looking at a hole in a tree and nothing would happen. And the opposite's true. Oh,
Well, there's been so much activity. And the squirrel you spotted,
Yes.
is that a slight concern? Because squirrels presumably predate the young.
right. Well, it's a really difficult conversation, this, because I've watched these woodpeckers bringing
there we are, look.
young blue tits and great tits back. That's a female, and she's feeding. Yeah, it's a feeding session, so she's bringing the food, and now she's off again.
So insects.
Insects, which we'll be looking at shortly, grubs, caterpillars. Remember, birds cannot carry water, so the food has to have the right amount of water in for those young woodpeckers to fledge. So I want you to imagine those white spherical eggs about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Incubation's about 16, 18 days, something like that. And when the young hatch, and I'm not being impolite, they are the ugliest sort of reptilian looking chicks that you can possibly imagine.
Only a mother could love them.
You couldn't make it up, because eventually they become these glorious birds, which if you feed birds in your garden, you have a suspended nut feeder, peanuts or sunflowers, and you have, even in urban areas, they will come into city centres if there's mature trees there. In urban areas around the periphery of large towns, you'll see great spot woodpeckers quite regularly. And in parkland, when you have parks in the middle of a town, those green areas, they'll also support certainly the great spot woodpecker, occasionally out on the grass on playing fields. Even in the centre of Norwich, I've watched green woodpeckers looking for ants on the ground.
And I interrupt you, squirrels we were talking about.
Yes, I get so distracted. Now, these woodpeckers have been bringing young blue tits, because when the woodpeckers you saw when they went over the hole, immediately a head came out to be fed. Well, woodpeckers have learned that not only my children do this, so to speak, but if I go to a blue tit's nest and black the hole out, the young jump up when they're ready to fledge, and out comes the long beak, grabs a chick and it takes it back because it's obviously good protein. You're either eat or eaten out in the countryside. So squirrels have now learnt to predate birds' nests in exactly the same way. So the squirrel will go across the hole, particularly at this stage when those young are almost ready. They're strong enough to jump up to the hole from the nest chamber a foot beneath, and that means they're almost ready to fledge and leave the nest. At that point, they're vulnerable to sparrowhawks and all the woodland hawks that we have here at the farm, but they're perhaps less at risk because those young get very hungry very early in the morning when it's feeding time for everything and everybody, and they start this continuous sort of chinking and chattering to call mum and dad back for more food, as young kids do, and that makes them vulnerable, and the squirrels have learnt that. So in the minute or so that we arrived, there was a squirrel scurried off. I think we'd frightened it, and then another one arrived. So it's that vulnerable bit, and that might be part of the reason mum and dad are coming back so frequently, because they would give a squirrel a hard time. A squirrel wouldn't tackle a great spot woodpecker. It would, particularly if there's the young about, it would attack the squirrel and just scare it off. But they are so persistent, grey squirrels. So that's a cause for concern. But nevertheless, those young woodpecker chicks are almost ready to leave the nest, and that's when they do make a lot of noise. But once they're free of the nest hole, they probably won't go back in it ever, because they always usually excavate a new one for the following year. They might not breed in their first year, but the parents, if they survive over the winter, they might do.
Well,
there we are.
We're craned our necks and getting a crick in our neck to look at 45 feet up in the air, and this ramrod straight tree and the hole and
another woodpecker. That's a female come, and she's feeding in. Absolutely beautiful. Yes, right beside one of the permissive walks on the farm, and I'm watching the branch to the left. There's a beech tree just to the left, and I have a feeling there's a missel thrush nest in there, and it's been visiting, and I keep getting distracted by the woodpeckers, and then my eye goes to the left and then comes back to the woodpecker hole. But it's that time of year when birds are all having their young. In case of blackbirds and the thrush species, they're on second brood. Our first swallows are out of the nest already, and that's just, I've tried to explain it in previous podcasts, that nature at this time of the year goes on at such a pace. It's really difficult to keep your hands on top of it and keep up to date with all the changes. So there we are. We're right at the end of spring, we're at the beginning of June, and this is the time of the year of renewal. Summer, late spring, it's a glorious time of year, and we've just spoiled. But you've got to have a real trick to find what that nest is. I keep walking along, not like a normal farmer looking at the ground and scratching my head. I look up in the tree canopy, and I'm always rewarded, and what a lovely thing to share.
It's a stunning start to our podcast. The great spotted woodpecker and the two chicks there, way up in the canopy, and it's worth getting a pain in the neck for, isn't it?
Yes, that's me. That's my job. I'm the pain in the neck, but that was a real job. Ooh, and the head's just come out. See what I mean? It's an insatiable appetite. I wouldn't want to look after those two up there. Well, there's probably 3 or even 4. It's one at a time with your head out of the nest. There's the head just coming out of the hole. Maggots, caterpillars for breakfast, dinner, tea, and for supper.
We've come to another part of the woodland, and the temperature's much more manageable this week. It's almost like normal late May weather. It's not cold, but it's overcast, and Just say it quietly, we've even had a little bit of rain and we're expecting some more later on. So I think Chris is probably happy about that. Let's just find where he is. And oh my word, Chris is like Sherlock Holmes now. He's got his magnifying glass out and he's examining the leaves of quite a small tree here on the side of the track. Chris, what's happening?
Oh, Matthew, if you make a mistake at this time of year of parking your car under a sycamore or a lime tree, you'll find that the whole windscreen is covered in a kind of sticky solution. It's called honeydew. And this is honeydew time of year. What happens is trees like this beside us and all through this woodland and all the ones behind us here are an introduced species, introduced into the UK in the late 15th century, and it's called sycamore. But it shouldn't really be called sycamore. When it was first introduced as a shade tree on parklands, on stately homes, to sort of, it was something new at the time and it got very popular. And it was brought in mistake because everybody thought it was the Palestine fig, which is a different species. The only similarity is the leaves were either got 3 points or 5 points on them, like these leaves in front of me. And what we didn't know is that sycamores sort of introduce themselves once they're here, the little helicopter seeds which they produce in the autumn, and then we get the winds that we have in the UK, and it spreads those seeds off far and wide, particularly at the end of the Second World War, when there was a lot of bomb sites in London and places like that all over the UK. So there's a lot of derelict land, brick rubble, and the seeds would land in that. And after sort of 80 years, those sycamores have grown into quite large trees. Foresters dislike it intensely because it's a shade tree. It presents anything really growing underneath it. It doesn't really do anything, and more importantly, if you're a forester, and I made a mistake in 1974. I cut down a lot of sycamore poles in the woodland, put them in the ground. 2 years later, they were all at a funny angle. They rotted off. So sycamore wood in the ground is very, very poor. You can make furniture from it, but it's very kind of a weak wood. So it's regarded in the forestry fraternity as a weed tree. They just don't like it.
Just
at
useless.
all. Useless. Because an oak could be, in other words, growing where a sycamore grows. It does spread itself out very well at the farm here on the pastures. When you get an autumn gale, the little sycamore seeds blow out onto the horse pastures, and we have to mow the grass really low down to get rid of it, because it is quite toxic to horses if they eat a lot of these little seedlings when they're about 2 to 3 inches tall. But this time of the year, something magic happens, and it's made me change my view about the fact that sycamore can be called a weed tree. Because when you have cool days like we have today, on the underside of the leaves of sycamores, you'll see hundreds of green or black aphids. And what they do is they have a little proboscis, and the proboscis comes out and punctures the little phloem tubes in the leaves. Now, the phloem takes energy and dissolved sugars back into the tree trunk, whereas the xylem brings up nutrients and water into the leaves themselves. But aphids know where to sort of put their little needle in, if you like. Now, sycamore and maple and lime all have something really peculiar about their sap. It's really, really high in sugar content. Now, aphids don't particularly like sugar, but to get enough protein for the aphids to grow, sorry if this is a bit technical, they take in all this sugar solution and they excrete it at the other end, which is what your honeydew is. So
it's passed through.
Yes, it's passed through completely and comes out of the back end of the aphid. Ants have learned about it, and it's well known that ants can milk aphids. They get to the back end of the aphid. Sorry if you're having your breakfast. It's all right. It's sugar solution, so don't worry. And they harvest this sort of sugar secretion that comes out of the back end of the aphid. And they also as a return, protect the aphid against things like lacewing and ladybirds and things like that, which love to eat the aphids.
Do you remember in Norfolk the truck that used to go around the villages collecting the waste from the cesspits?
Yes.
Was called the honey cart.
The honey cart, Honeydew. It was really just a polite name of sort of covering up something a bit distasteful, to put it politely. And that's what happened. So this honeydew is really valuable. Now, the aphids themselves are a really important part of the system, because when we have this cold weather, if you want to see swifts, house martins and swallows en masse, the wind blows through one side of the wood, comes out the other, and we just visited some sycamore trees on the edge of the wood, and they are literally, there can be 2 million aphids, to give you an idea, on one sycamore tree, on a large sycamore. They're attractive trees out in the open. You've got very wide sort of base of the tree. They can be up to 100 feet tall and 100 feet across on the base. They're big branches if there's nothing to eat them. And why I've brought you here is we're in a shady part of the wood here. The aphids have, there's just a few. Now, if I reach up and get this leaf and you look underneath, there they are.
Well, there we are, dark coloured specks, and you can see the wings, can't
Yes, those are the flying aphids. And Rat's complaining because we're right by one of the permissive walks here at the farm. So he's decided to have a bark at somebody walking past. He doesn't like King Charles dogs particularly.
Yes, a King Charles.
Yes, very posh.
Didn't like windscreen wipers on the way up either.
No, he didn't. I accidentally turned the wipers on and Rat's head was going from side to side. Right, so something interesting happens now, and this is the bit, because this tree's in the shade. It's 10 days later than the trees on the edge of the wood, but I thought I'd bring you here, and I brought a magnifying glass. Now, very few people have seen that. So I'm going to hold the magnifying glass and look at those white splodgers, and you will start to see something else.
Eggs.
Eggs.
Yes, you can see them all individual.
Right, a little clump. Go on, have a guesstimate how many eggs in that clump, which is smaller than my little fingernail.
I don't know, 50 or 60?
There's more than 100. You can go 10 by 10.
There's a big clump there.
Yes, yeah, that clump will have 250 eggs in it. And they are the eggs of the green fly, which will hatch out and form miniature versions of their parents.
That one seems to have scattered out a little bit.
Yes, it has, yeah. Obviously, the winds yesterday, as the green aphid was laying the eggs, it didn't get them all in one splodge.
And this is the underside of the leaf.
This is the underside.
Between the veins.
Yep, exactly that. And so those eggs are not doing anything harmful at the moment to the leaf. It's just the adults. Now, farmers don't like aphids because the aphid themselves might not do any harm, but aphids can carry a virus. It doesn't affect sycamore, but it does affect sugar beet. It's called virus yellows, and it's still a pain today. And we have a plant out on the farm which is quite scarce. It's called spindle, and in the early 1940s, late 1930s, farmers discovered that green aphids, Mysis persicae, hibernated on spindle. So all the farm workers were sent out with saws, cutlasses, anything, and you cut all the spindle down, or it's a British native plant, and that they thought that would help reduce the incidence of virus yellows, but it didn't. It was still a problem to this very day.
And gardeners don't particularly like the green fly.
No, because of that honeydew, and I mentioned that the aphids puncture the phloem tubes in the underside of the leaves to get the nectar, and so it spoils the foliage a little bit. If you're growing really posh flowers, for, I was going to say crufts, but
for Chelsea, which Chelsea's just been on, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I was only tongue-in-cheek.
They do have the odd wildlife-friendly garden now, which must hearten you.
It's going that much more that way, so you have to be tolerant of things like this, because you're also feeding the birds. As I said, when you get those winds coming through on cold days, when the swallows, the swifts and the house martins and sand martins only feed on aerial plankton, the aphids flying through the air is absolutely essential, and you can't have a better tree to do that than this fellow, the sycamore. So there we are. I sort of stand by it, and I think every forester in the country, when they listen to this podcast, they'll all be hissing like it's a sort of pantomime show and I'm the baddie. But you do have to stand back sometimes, because many of our native trees are suffering. We've got a new kid on the block here at the moment. It's just killed 4 gigantic oak trees. It's called sudden oak death. I've not seen it here before. They're beautiful trees and they're standing there dead. And of course, all around us we've got ash trees, some with no leaves on them. And that's ash dieback. Of course, we've lost most of the elms. So, because of our climate change, these pseudo plantanemus, the sort of sycamore fig, look underneath that leaf. there's
Many thousands
of eggs.
And when will they hatch out then?
In about 2 to 3 days' time. Very quick indeed, quick turnaround. And then all the underside of the leaves will be shiny with that honeydew. But there we are. So, interesting.
There are many bird species on High Ash Farm, and Chris Skinner, that's one of them, isn't it?
Yes, very diminutive. Matthew, we're being serenaded by a wren.
Just one of the great delights of visiting the farm, but we need your assistance.
Yes, to keep us in fine voice, we need a few donations.
Any surplus funds to go towards the wonderful conservation work, to make a small one-off payment or a monthly donation. highashfarm.com/podcast.
Believe me, it's just a pure delight.
And that includes Jenny Wren.
Very fine voice. Big trees, so it might be a replacement for many of our British native trees. The climate is changing. I don't know that I've ever known this farm to be as dry as it is at the moment, and they seem to be able to withstand quite a bit of dry weather. So it might just be a replacement and be regarded as something differently in the future. Only time will tell.
Some very dark clouds on the horizon, which might provide the first decent rain, really, since the winter. And there wasn't that much during the winter either. We're walking through the most beautiful field of wild flowers, dominated, to my eye, by these daisies.
Oh, Matthew, that's what we were looking at a week ago. And on one of the stems of the daisies, I've just spotted our subject for last week's podcast, which was the common blue butterfly.
Oh, there we are.
With its wings closed and it's slightly camouflaged. It's a male.
And the sort of speckly dots.
Yes, and the underside is unusual because normally they're on the move. It's a little bit cooler this morning. Once you get down and have a close look, there's almost a silver margin on the wings, and then it's just flown off.
You still get that lovely impression of lavender colour.
Yes, yeah.
And talking of some beauties on the wings, on the way over, to prove your point from our last segment, we saw swallows flying 6 inches off the ground,
Yes.
hoovering up those aphids.
Yes, the wind has got up in front of the showers, which are well on their way. It's quite a strong breeze this morning, and so it's dislodged those aphids. But we are spoilt because I brought you to this spot probably February time, and many podcasts ago now. The weeks fly past, and I was standing here with my mouth wide open, not trying to catch butterflies, they weren't about then, because I found the largest amount of orchids I have ever seen in my life on this south slope. It's clay with lots of chalk in it, so the pH is absolutely perfect. And all I can say is the diagonal across this hillside, there's 4 acres of this particular portion of the field, which is 100 acres, and it is peppered with bee orchids. We've looked at one of the early species of orchid a few podcasts ago, the early purple or long purple orchid, and this is even more spectacular. So what I've done, I've put a little stake in here just to make us be careful where we're putting...
Medium rare.
Yes, thank you. You're always thinking of food, Gudgin. Just look down here. Something unusual's happened. Normally, this species of orchid, the bee orchid, are up there nearly knee-high on this soil, and we've got to go on our knees to get down to them because
a few inches up.
Because of the dry conditions, the orchid has adjusted its flowering height, so it hasn't produced long stems. I think if we get plenty of rain in the next 24 hours, they will continue to grow and flower at their normal height. So it's fairly dry at the moment, so I'm going to get down on my hands and knees and just part the oxeye daisy. This is lady's bedstraw coming up into flower, and here's our first one. It's got 2 or 3 unopened buds at the top, and then halfway down the stem, and the stem, to give everybody an idea, is a total of 4 inches tall. That's 100 millimetres tall. And I kept coming here for several weeks after we found what must have been about 10,000 bee orchid plants in the rosette stage, and I kept looking down, scratching my head, and I thought, this is not possible. I can't find any whatsoever. And because of the dry weather, all the lower leaves did this. They died off, went chocolate brown colour. Can you see?
The tip of that leaf and some of the others,
yes,
looks like you've held a match and burnt it.
Right, well, look down at the bottom here.
They're completely black.
They are black, and do you know, I could not find any of the orchids. I had made you a promise that I would bring you back once they started to flower, so that we can enjoy it. And later on today, I'll cut a little walk through with the mower and sign it with what we're looking at this morning, a little fact sheet about bee orchids. They are, I suppose, the first bee orchid you ever see if you're interested in wildflowers. It just takes your breath away.
Oh, they are lovely, aren't they?
Nothing really to compare it with it. So we got 3 very bright pink petals, and then underneath is the flower tube. So I just bend that little plant over, and it looks exactly as though a bee has landed on the lower petal, and that's the body of the bee. It's thought that it was a lure to attract bees to pollinate them, and it's called pseudo pollination, which is a sort of false pollination, if you like. And in Europe, some of the orchid species are pollinated by insects, but the strange thing is, in the UK, we're almost certain that bee orchids are self-pollinating. They don't actually need to attract the bee, and yet it's adapted itself to look exactly like a bee. Right.
They all have it, don't they? Every single one of them.
Look at them.
And it is exactly like a bee head first into
the pollination bit. But that's what threw me. Just look at the bottom of this one as well. It just, all the lower leaves completely died off, and then this flower spike has come out to the centre of that plant. There it is. It just looks like, as you said, you know, so somebody set fire to it. There's been a fire here, which there hasn't been, and all the leaves died. And so I thought, whatever have I said? I made you this promise to bring you back, and now they're all throwing up these flower spikes as normal. And obviously they're photosynthesizing and getting some energy into the double ovoid tuber, which gives orchids, the whole orchid family, its name, which is down under the ground here, 2 to 3 inches down. One little tuber will be larger than the other. But where I've put the stake, just to give you an idea of the population here, within a foot of the stake, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 orchids, and it's like this right across the side of this hill. It's just spectacular.
And will these grow to a normal height eventually?
Well, this is the whole thing. They have produced some flower buds further up the stem, but because it's so dry, I mean, I brought this inch diameter stake here, and I had to knock it in with a hammer.
It's a wooden stake, by the way.
Yes,
if you've still got in your mind what I said earlier.
Yes, I know. We try to forget your droll sense of humour. So I had a job to get this stick into the ground with a hammer. The clay has completely died out. And the reason the wildflowers here, the ones we're looking across the top of it now, about 18 to 24 inches tall. It's sainfoin. And
I've got real bees here.
You've got real bees. Now you can see what's called bee orchid. We've got 3 right beside us on the lower petals of the sainfoin. And to be honest, it really does look like a bee pollinating these orchids.
These are beauties, aren't they? And they're the right size.
Yes.
Same colour.
The same colour, everything about them. They're buff-tailed bumblebees. And you can see the pollen on that one's legs. It's gathering pollen from the sainfoin, and they're little pollen baskets, we call them. And these are juvenile female bees taking the pollen and the nectar that they gather back to wherever the bee colony, the nest is, for the bumblebees. They don't make honey as such. They might have a few cells with nectar in it, but they're not like honey bees, so completely different. But they're endangered as well. So there's not many places that you can go where you can go and count 10,000 orchids. It's a rare sight, I can promise you, what we've created somewhat accidentally here, although it's a wildflower field that's been sown.
But here we are down on our sort of haunches, and we're actually at flower head level, aren't we? And you get a whole different level of beauty, seeing the insects and the pink and the white of the daisies. It's so wonderful, and it's not even a sunny day today.
No, and it's just starting to flower. So the beauty of it is the plants that we can see. There's an understory here, which is all held down at the moment. That's yellow rattle down there, only about 4 inches tall. That should be the best part of a foot tall. There's buttercup, ranunculus acris. That's the meadow buttercup there, growing away about half its normal height. And the ones that are thriving are the deep-rooted ones, things like this sainfoin here. Look at this. This is going to come into flower in about a week's time. Feathery leaves, and the important thing is, as the flowers open, the little pink flowers have got little guides on them. They're called, I'll just reach over and pull one towards us here. Now, if you look very carefully, can you see those little lines on the lower petal there?
Yeah, like pinstripes.
Yes, exactly like that. Very, very posh indeed. They're called honey guides, and that's to guide those bumblebees in. So the plant is giving you some nectar in exchange for you getting the pollen brushed on your back. That's the deal of producing the nectar. And the bumblebee will then fly off and pollinate another plant, so they'll be visiting the sainfoin. It's a very high nectar yielding plant, which is why it grows. It's drought resistant, like the orchids growing all around our feet here. It's thriving on the high pH, the calcium in the soil. There we are, perfect balance, and what a sight. I'm a millionaire many times over, not in my bank account, you understand, but to produce this, it just lifts the spirit, even on a cloudy morning like this.
Almost time to sign off, unfortunately, for another week, Chris, but got a bulging post bag once again of emails. Neil sent us a photograph of the side of a tree. He says, can you identify the clumps hanging from this tree, which I assume is a silver birch? We spotted it while walking past one of the lakes at Pensthorpe. That's near Fakenham in our own county of Norfolk, isn't it? At first glance, we believed them to be mistletoe, but on further inspection, they look to be made of spiders' webs.
Wow, I've had a close look and I smiled immediately. Not spider's webs, it is a silver birch tree, and it's overhanging a river, and it's covered in these rather mysterious looking clumps, and I knew straight away it's got another name called witch's brooms. And it's a reaction, particularly on silver birch trees, to a fungus. Witch's brooms, or unusual growths on various species of trees, can be caused by insects, by damage to the tree perhaps, where it sends out lots of extra shoots. But in this case, it's a fungus which attacks portion of the tree, and the tree reacts by sending out what's called a witch's broom, a really dense little cluster of tiny little twiglets, so that when you look at it, usually looks quite spherical, which is why you thought on first glance it was mistletoe, but it is very common. We've got one just at the top of High Ash Lane here at Caister St Edmunds, which is nearly 3 feet in diameter, and it really does look quite sinister. It looks as though a witch was flying past and has left her broom actually hanging in the tree. Of course, it always inspires lots of sort of conjecture out in the countryside when you see unusual things and you don't know the answer for it. So it's obviously something to do with witches out in the countryside.
You quite enjoy the folklore
I
aspect,
do.
don't you?
I absolutely love it, where all the stories come from. And it helps you remember, because it's got such a long scientific name, the fungus. You'll probably all go to sleep if I try to pronounce it. Whereas witch's broom, most people, including foresters, would know exactly what you're talking about straight away. And but lovely picture of it, and really well done. That's a superb photograph.
Diane Lawson says, I've had this nesting box for 3 years and finally I've got residents. Great tits. The female has been in residence for at least a month and the male is coming regularly with food for her. She often leaves the nest but always sleeps there at night. No sign of any eggs yet though. Is this usual?
Right, it is getting late because birds will use nest boxes as sleeping quarters, particularly during the winter months. I have a blue tit box at the farm and it's often frequented by wrens, not just one wren going in, but up to 20 all stacked in there. And so it's unusual, but it is now late because blue tits, great tits, long-tailed tits time their nesting for the emergence of the winter moth caterpillar at this time of the year, particularly on oak trees. You can have thousands of these tiny little green caterpillars, and they time their egg laying, incubation and hatching of the young to coincide with the hatch of the winter moth caterpillars.
So there's still time, Diane.
Yes, it's unusual. So sometimes great tits have a failed first brood, or it gets predated. Squirrels, stoats, weasels sometimes manage to get in and eat the eggs, but it's unusual. Normally they put all their eggs in one basket, which is why blue tit, great tit clutches have 8, 9, even 10 eggs in the nest, and it's that putting all your eggs in one basket kind of gamble, and often they won't go for a second brood. I'm not saying they don't ever do that, but it's unusual if they do.
Let's fly down to Horsham, in a wonderful part of the world in Sussex. Odette Pinniger says, our lawn is full of daisies. I love them. I want to add more wild flowers, in fact, that are low growing, to form a sort of mini meadow of low growing plants. I've got a list of flower seeds to add, bird's foot trefoil and self-heal, but how often should I cut it and when?
Right, the best time to seed your lawn without destroying the lawn is in autumn, when those plants would normally produce their seed and it would drop on the ground. So if you can go with nature, so to speak, then you stand every chance of success. So first thing to do is to cut the lawn late on in the year, as low and as short as you possibly can. Then you scatter the seeds on the top. These are all seeds that don't necessarily need a seed bed, so bare soil in other words, and there are several species. Some of them are quite tall. You can use British wildflowers that don't mind being on undisturbed soil. The first one to spring to mind would be something like teasels out in the open, or if you've got a shady area, something like foxgloves, Digitalis purpurea would be perfect. Some of the more interesting smaller plants, bird's foot trefoil, the same time, sort of late August, early September, put them on the ground very thinly, rake it in so you can give the seeds a helping hand, and if it was really dry, perhaps water the lawn, but wait for, the best thing to do is for the autumn rains to arrive. And you can, if the soil type is right, get 2 or 3 of the species to be successful. But don't expect everything you sow to be successful. Some plants like disturbed soil, things like poppy for instance, really only grows on disturbed soil. So learn what you're going to put on and give it its best chance. Sowing in the autumn is great.
Mark Bishop, we've got your email, and Chris is going to answer that at some stage very soon, because I note you have special plans. we won't go into it any further than that because it may be a surprise.
Thanks, Mark.
Lovely to get your comments and questions, and keep them coming. Email chris@highashfarm.com. And still a continued thanks for all your voluntary donations and subscriptions to this podcast, which keeps us going. And here we are each week from this lovely spot in Norfolk, which Chris Skinner's called home for all your lifetime,
Yes.
about 35 years.
Yes, just add a 7 in front of the 5. Yes, but it's a delight and a huge pleasure for us to do this each week. It's something I look forward to all week. I've already got some topics planned for next week, but things are changing so quickly. I can't believe how the year is slipping through our fingers. June already. Goodness.
We'll find out how you can take part in this voluntary subscription by going to the website highashfarm.com/podcast. And, Rat has been very quiet this week, hasn't he? He's been chasing after bumblebees,
Yes,
and
he
there
has.
he is. Butter
Yeah.
wouldn't melt.
Yes, look at that. And he's got his head in a clump of oxeye daisy and he's just looking this way. So he's got a little posy round his neck.
Very nice, lovely.
Thank you, Matthew, as always, for coming out to the farm and sharing what we shared this morning. My delight.